What to do if you're trying to solve the housing crisis in your state and you've already done all the obvious things and house prices are still astronomical? Well, this is a problem that's we're starting to see in some states already. So in places like California, Massachusetts in some cases, even Texas, maybe not Texas so much, but some states have already done a lot of the obvious things in terms of trying to bring down house prices. They've enabled more of the kind of gentle density that's good. They're letting townhomes be built, duplexes, triplexes, accessory dwelling units in some cases. They're playing around with the minimum lot size rules, making it possible to have smaller lots or to split lots. So all of the things that enable you to build more and use higher best use of the land that's already there within cities. And that's great, but often municipalities, even when states pass these laws, they'll slow walk it. They'll find new and inventive ways to jam up approvals and just slow walk things. Or they'll just flagrantly defy the law in some cases and just refuse to grant the permits that state law says they should be granting. But assuming you get all of that done, in some cases, the housing crisis persists, right? It doesn't necessarily solve everything. So then you need to begin to look to the next frontier of, okay, what's next? We've done some of the very obvious things and some of the things that are in our model legislation at the Institute for Justice and the Home Acts, and it's all the things I talked about, right? It's minimum lot size, it's gentle density, it's enabling apartments, townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, it's lot splits, and all the procedural stuff as well. But what else do you do? There needs to be more, right? And there need to be more tools in the arsenal. Unfortunately, there are, and I want to talk about a couple of them. So one of them is single-stair reform. The best way to describe this is if you've ever been on holiday to anywhere in Europe, you'll often see in some of the ancient cities, even the modern cities for that matter, small apartment buildings that aren't, huge block-long apartment buildings like you might get in Houston or the Sunbelt cities. They're small. They might just have 2-3 apartments on each floor, even just one apartment per floor. And that's legal in a lot of European countries because in Europe, apartment buildings can be built with just a single staircase. In North America, particularly in the United States, single stairs generally prohibited in a lot of places. And this is because of fire regulations, basically. The feeling was there needs to be more than one point of egress. If the building catches fire, it's an apartment building, there needs to be more than one way out. But these rules were conceived at a time when buildings were a lot more flammable. Fire safety technology wasn't the same as it is now, right? These days there's a lot more fire retardant building materials, there are sprinkler systems, there are lots of other kind of safeguards that just didn't exist before. And yet single stair buildings are still prohibited in a lot of times. And single stair buildings are great because you can build more of them in a small space. It lets you have gentle density, and it lets smaller developers build apartment buildings, because often if you're building a huge block-sized massive apartment building, which is the only kind of apartment building you can build in a lot of places, that locks out a lot of the small developers, the family developers, the first-time developers, the immigrant developers, the ones that don't have much capital, and only the big players can take part, and that just raises costs. If you have fewer suppliers, it raises costs. And also single-stair apartments are nice, right? I grew up in London, and they were fine. With modern building materials, you don't need to have these long liminal concrete corridors like apartment buildings, like hotels. It's just not necessary. So this is one reform. Often it's governed more at the building code level than at the state legislative level, but there are still some state legislative solutions maybe where you enable or you you require municipalities to let single stair buildings happen. So that's one thing that could be good. And the other one I want to talk about is single room occupancy. So for a long time, single room occupancy, or SROs, was considered the bottom rung of the housing ladder. So it's a boarding house, right? It's like you're renting a room in another house, and then you have shared access to perhaps the kitchen, the bathroom, maybe a lounge or other communal facilities. For a long time, up until probably the 60s, then this was very common. SROs were, the bottom rung of the housing ladder for a long time. Often they were old hotels that had become dilapidated, and then, they fell into sort of, not disreputable use, but it was just bottom rung housing, right? Unfortunately, they were made illegal in a lot of places, almost in all states, and you can't have them anymore. But SROs are starting to make a comeback, and not just as bottom rung of the housing ladder. So they can also be high-end SROs. And in fact, I lived in one in London. It was called Springboard Urban, and it was like an adult dorm for young professionals with their first job in the city. So I used to be a management consultant. When I graduated from university and moved to London, I lived in this building, and it was divided into flats of 3 or 4 ensuite rooms, and together we would share a kitchen. And then as a building, we shared a movie theatre, a gymnasium, a games room, an outdoor deck, and the management company would put on social events. So this wasn't some, skeezy boarding house of low repute. This was like a high-end, expensive thing. Well, not expensive, it was cheaper than an apartment, which is the appeal, right? So these things can be good, and this could be a great first step on the housing ladder for young professionals who are otherwise being forced out of the inner cities and having to drive in from suburbs and exurbs, which causes traffic and strains infrastructure. So this could be another great way, in some cities at least, where there's an urban core where young professionals congregate, or in university and college towns that already have private university dorms. This could be another just tool in the arsenal. This could be another aspect of trying to tackle the housing crisis. So single-stair reform and SROs, particularly luxury or premium SROs. If your state's already done a lot of the other things and you're thinking about new steps to take, then those are a couple of ideas to consider. If you want to know more about them, then feel free to get in touch with me. My email is shooper@ig.org, or you can just DM me at any of my social media channels. I'm @LegLawyer everywhere. That's LEGE lawyer. Happy to talk with you more about this and figure how we can partner to try and promote good housing affordability and good pro-property rights legislation in your state.